Hey guys, it's Stephanie, the sport dietitian here, coming to you live for our Facebook Live event that we're having this afternoon with me and the Build Up Dietitians team. So hope you guys are all having a lovely Friday so far. I know that I'm excited to kind of get things wrapped up for the weekend. This weekend I'm actually running my very first virtual half marathon. I've got it planned for tomorrow morning, and I'm looking forward to it because I'm running the first part on my own, but then I have a friend who's registered for the 5K, and so I'm gonna meet her up with her, and then we're gonna finish the last 10 kilometers together. So I'm looking forward to having that little bit of a break and having somebody with me to do that. So yeah, just kind of filling up a little bit of time here. I can see that there's people starting to come on, so we'll just sort of give everyone a chance to get in, and then we'll start getting to some questions. So in the meantime, like I said, my name is Steph Hnatiuk, and I'm a dietitian here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And so I do a couple of different things in my practice. The first thing that I do is sport nutrition as a private practice dietitian working here in Winnipeg. And I also do a little bit of a part-time clinical position as well at one of our large hospitals here in Winnipeg. So I do medicine and also intensive care. So I've kind of got a combination of both things going on, and it's really great. And so I've been in private practice now for, basically since I graduated as a dietitian, I kind of dove into private practice right away. And it's been 8 years now that I've been doing this, and I've gone from starting out, working out of different gyms as a personal trainer and dietitian, doing a lot of home type visits and kind of meeting people anywhere. For 5 years, I also had my own office and own personal training studio space, which I've recently gotten out of to move my business virtually and then also into another medical facility here in the city. So I've moved around a lot, but the whole time, fitness and sport nutrition has always been a really big passion of mine. So looks like we're starting to get a couple people kind of getting on the feed here. I can see the numbers, so I'm super excited that all of you guys are here with me this afternoon. Let's maybe start with some questions. If you have any for me, then you can just go ahead and type them into the box. And I think that the Build Up Dietitians team also had a few kind of questions ready to go to get the ball rolling. So let's see what you guys have got for me. So while we're waiting for a couple of questions to come in, maybe I can talk a little bit about the journey that I kind of took to get interested in sport nutrition. And for me, it really kind of began when I was in university. So I was in my third year of studying at the University of Manitoba here in Winnipeg. And, I knew that I wanted to sort of combine nutrition and fitness. And I ended up getting certified as a personal trainer while I was doing my undergrad, and started working as a personal trainer out of some different gyms around the city as I was finishing up my education. And so, it kind of just led, I always knew that I wanted to be in business, and I always knew that I wanted to do private practice to some capacity. And so it was really great that then I was able to sort of combine those two things. And once I graduated with my nutrition degree, I was able to start offering nutrition services to my clients, and then everything kind of went on from there. Okay. I don't know if I'll be able to see if there's questions that pop up. Okay. So the question here is from the Build Up Dietitians team, and it says, in a perfect world, would you prefer to do one full-time between the clinical and the private practice? And am I working with any COVID patients right now? So that's a really good question. So I'm going to start with the first one, because I actually get that question all the time from people when I'm sort of saying that I do part-time clinical and part-time private practice. And honestly, I feel like I can't imagine giving up either one. And I think it sort of brings up a really important point that I would probably make to any new dietitians or interns or students that might be on the chat with us today, just that you don't have to choose. I see sometimes on social media there's a lot of kind of private versus clinical, which one's better, is clinical nutrition boring? Is private practice too salesy? And sort of a little bit of, back and forth between the two groups. And I would really want to say that you don't have to choose. Like, if you like both, then you can do whatever you want as a dietitian. It's such a wonderful career because we have that flexibility. And so, right now I'm 1 full day a week in my private practice, and then I'm doing like evening virtual consults and things like that a little bit on the weekends. And then I'm a 0.7 EFT in my clinical job. And it's a great balance because every day is different. I'm seeing lots of different types of people, and the skills that you gain from either position are really transferable. So the counseling skills that we get being private practice dietitians translate over so well into being able to work as a team in clinical and being able to communicate with our clinical patients. And, we get patients as inpatients here at the hospital that have all kinds of interesting, complicated disease states. And, you never know what you're going to get in private practice. You might be dealing with somebody who has, lots of comorbidities that they're coming to you for. So there's lots of crossover, which I really like. And so I think it's great that we have the opportunity to be able to do all of these different things. And then, yes, so here at my hospital, because we do have a couple of intensive care units, so my unit is intermediate intensive care, so we haven't had any COVID patients on my unit as of yet, but in the medical intensive care here and at our other hospital is where we would have them, and that's where I am sometimes on the weekends. So fortunately here where I live in Winnipeg, our COVID numbers have been relatively low. So we haven't had a huge, overwhelming number of people in our hospitals or in our intensive care units, and we're just all kind of keeping our fingers crossed that it stays that way. So, and we've had a few people that have come out to our medicine wards that have been in intensive care, but they've come and gone out of hospital relatively quickly. So, no, personally, I haven't had to do a lot with those patients yet, but great question. So for anybody who's just kind of popping on, you can go ahead and just type any questions that you have in the chat box there, and I'll get to them. And then in the meantime, while we're kind of getting some more questions coming in, I'll also share my social media with you guys. So on Instagram, I'm at Steph the Sport Dietitian, and there's a period in between each of the words. Steph the Sport Dietitian. And then on Facebook here, my business page can be found at Steph Hnatiuk Performance Nutrition, which is also the name of my website at www.stephanienatiuk.com, where I have my my blog and everything like that for people to check out. On Twitter, I'm Steph H Fitness, and that's my old Twitter handle for, way back in the day when I was just a personal trainer. Unfortunately, you can't change those. So Steph H Fitness, and then obviously I'm here as Steph Hnatiuk. So we have another question coming in from Caroline, and it says, how would you recommend starting up privately? So yeah, great question. I definitely see that a lot in all of our various Facebook dietitian groups of, new dietitians or just dietitians that are looking for a change, who are wanting to figure out how they can kind of get the ball rolling. And I would say, it's so much easier now than when I got started. With social media, you can put so little, financial cost into just getting started. Back when I started out, we didn't really have social media, so you kind of had to pay to have a website and everything like that. Marketing was a little bit more challenging because, would you be paying for advertisements like in a newspaper and, old school. So my advice for anybody who wants to kind of get started with the whole idea of private practice would be looking at what kind of population do you want to work with? Like, who's sort of your ideal client group? Do you want to work with adults? Do you want to work with children, maybe families? Is there a certain condition that you feel like you can really help people with? And then just getting into like figuring out who that client is, what problems do they have, and how can you help them solve those problems. And so that goes a long way to figuring out what your marketing strategy is going to be and allow you to go out there and attract those people. Depending on where you live, sometimes you can make a really good living as just sort of a general private practice dietitian. So you're just, you're set up, you kind of see everybody. Maybe you do some intuitive eating counseling. Maybe you do a little bit of diabetes counseling, some pediatrics. And I did that for a long time where I kind of saw a little bit of everything. And it was great. I got a lot of exposure and a lot of experience, and I was certainly busy. What I was finding after years of doing that was it was really hard to be an expert in all of these different areas of nutrition. So it was challenging for me to, in the same day, I might have a patient who had diabetes, and then I might have a patient who had a child who was a picky eater, and then I might have somebody who was an athlete wanting to eat for performance. And it was difficult to stay super up to date on all those things. So really figuring out what you're passionate about and kind of going towards that with your focus, I think, is a really good place to start so that you're always excited to go to work every day. And then, you don't need to do anything fancy in terms of a website right off the bat, but getting yourself on a good EMR program. Practice Better is a really popular one that lots of people use, and there's some other ones as well, so that you can, do your appointments, keep track of your patients, do your booking and everything like that. Here in Canada, we also do have private insurance, which is what a lot of people use to pay for my services. And so, you can also get set up with being able to bill to insurance if that's something that you wanted to do. So feel free to throw in any other questions you have about kind of getting started with private practice. But for me, I found that it wasn't a huge financial investment, and I think that nowadays it's probably even less of one because we have the option to do so much of our stuff virtually. So our next question here is from Matt, and it says, when working for a fitness facility, do gyms accept RDs for nutrition counseling, or do they still expect some form of personal training nutrition certification? I can't speak to how it works sort of everywhere, but here where I live, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, it essentially kind of comes down to insurance coverage. So we don't have any licensing regulations here in Manitoba. So basically anybody can function as a nutritionist, whether or not they have any formal education. They don't even need to have a nutrition certificate or anything of the sort in order to kind of practice as a nutritionist. But insurance companies who are going to be paying for private insurance will basically only pay if the nutrition counseling is provided by an RD. So that's sort of the only kind of level of that. And so, most gyms are going to have personal trainers that maybe have just a nutrition certification, just because there is no legislation requiring anyone to have anything different. But some places are definitely getting more dietitians working with them, especially dietitians who maybe have a combination of, a kinesiology degree, maybe they're an athletic therapist in addition to it, a strength and conditioning coach. So what I've noticed in the past couple of years locally is that we're getting a lot more dietitians who have additional training in exercise and performance that are then getting jobs in these places, as opposed to the other way around. So I think we're really making good progress, and there's more and more dietitians that are getting interested in sport and are getting interested in working with athletes. So I think we're kind of shifting the marketplace and shifting the value that we can add just by getting ourselves out there and getting that exposure. Okay. If you have. Yeah, and for the most part, again, it depends on what program you sort of go to in terms of your nutrition. If you're at my university, we had a sport nutrition course that people could take. And then there also is, a sport nutrition component that some interns can complete as well. So some interns do get that exposure to the sport nutrition world during their education, as opposed to having to get all of that experience outside of that. So it kind of depends on your path. And I know that a lot of programs are very different in terms of, what coursework is available as a dietitian when we're doing our undergrad, what internship placements are available. So we all tend to graduate from university with very different experience, very different levels of information and expertise in different things. One example I can share is that I basically went through my entire university career and then even into my internship, completing internship and essentially having zero pediatrics experience. So, to this day, I occasionally will get questions about, working with kids and stuff like that. And I'm just like, I've been a dietitian for 8 years and I really have zero experience with that. Meanwhile, other people who maybe had more of an interest could have spent quite a bit of their time as an intern working in that area, and so they would graduate and be very competent to be pediatric dietitians. So we all kind of have a little bit of a different path. But yeah, thanks so much, Matt, for the question. So feel free to go ahead and just type any questions that you have into the chat box. I don't know how many Canadian dietitians you guys get doing these, so if you have any questions about being a dietitian in Canada, and some of the things that might be different here versus over there, that I'm happy to answer questions about that too. If you guys have questions about my business and about my private practice and sort of how I got into that and everything there, then you can definitely feel free to throw those in the chat box as well. And I know the Build Up Dietitians team had some extra questions that they had ready to go. So if you guys want to share some of those as well, we can kind of keep the ball rolling. So I think I went through all my social media already. I'm definitely the most active on my Instagram for more client or sort of patient-centered sport nutrition information that I share on there. And then I find on my Twitter, I'm definitely more active engaging with other professionals, and I sort of like to use Twitter as a learning tool for myself. So I get, follow a lot of scientists and journal articles and things like that to kind of get more education for myself from Twitter. So I think it's really handy if you're kind of a newer dietitian or maybe a student who's on here with us today. Then I would definitely say, getting on social media for that education experience, I think can be really positive. So we have another question here. It says, I'd love to hear about some differences between Canadian and US dietetic practice. So I think that one of the biggest differences that I've certainly noticed, and of course, I don't know everything about how it works in America for you guys, but one of the things that I've noticed is that we tend to have our university and internship placements all kind of wrapped into one. So for myself here in Manitoba, we study at the University of Manitoba, and the University of Manitoba has an internship program that is affiliated with my university. So we know, in our third year of university, that we've been accepted and we're going to get into that same internship. So the path is, I think, a little bit smoother. And then we have our internship coordinator who plans all of our placements for us and kind of coordinates everything like that. So we're still very much like students from beginning to end, where I think in some parts of the States, you guys, obviously put it in the chat box if I'm totally off base on this, but I think sometimes you guys have to go out and sort of find your own internship placements and sort of coordinate the different things that you need on your own. So that kind of sounds a little bit different. I also know that I've seen lots of articles lately talking about licensure and sort of how it varies state to state. So all of our provinces in Canada all have colleges. So in Canada, kind of across the board, we do have that governing body for registered dietitians. Unfortunately, that governing body does not extend into covering the whole nutritionist side of things. So our college exists to protect the public, but we don't really have anyone going out to sort of regulate anybody doing nutrition therapy that maybe doesn't have that license to do it. So like I said before, really kind of our only protection here in Manitoba is just from insurance purposes. And of course, you wouldn't be able to get a clinical job if you weren't a registered dietitian. So I think, also kind of state to state, I know some of you guys don't have any licensure really at all. And so that can definitely make things a little bit more difficult. In Canada, we also have some rules. The rules depend a little bit depending on what province you're in, but some provinces will only allow you to offer nutrition counseling to people who also reside in that same province where you hold your license. You can't counsel someone, from British Columbia if you aren't licensed in British Columbia. So as dietitians, we would have to pay for the license for all of these different areas, or they would just have to find somebody locally. So from a virtual practice perspective, sometimes it's not the best just because it doesn't allow you to really specialize and reach a broader population, but it kind of keeps people sort of seeing somebody a little bit more locally. And so the question here is the credentialing process in Canada so difficult too? I don't know. I don't know if I would say the process is particularly difficult here. Of course, I can only kind of speak to how it works in Manitoba. But essentially what happens is we finish our internship, and then we write our Canadian dietetic registration exam, and then we would get our license. We then would be registered within our province, and every year we have to complete our continuing education. So for us, for continuing education, how it works here is it's pretty simple, I would say. You can essentially, choose whatever type of continuing education you want to complete depending on where you work. Maybe it's webinars, maybe it is attending conferences, maybe, for example, if you work as a writer, or if you work maybe as somebody doing communications or social media, then your continuing education can be very particular to the area that you specialize in, even if it's not specific to dietetics practice. And what's great is that, for our college, as long as you can demonstrate that this did enhance your practice in some way, and you can show that you have become a better dietitian or become better at the work that you do because of taking that particular course, then it would be okay for getting your points. We don't have quite the same system of, I think you guys call them like the CEUs, where it has to be approved. We don't have that. And it's because we have Dietitians of Canada is our professional group, but it's not a regulatory body. So across Canada, we have Dietitians of Canada, and that is sort of our professional group. They put on our annual conference, and they do lots of events and education and sort of public, work with the public, but they don't regulate us. So everything like that is province to province only. So yeah, there's definitely some differences. I think especially in terms of like who can practice nutrition, where you can practice nutrition. I think it all gets a little bit complicated. And so, I see that someone says here that it's rough and maybe they should move to Canada. I think Canada's great, so anybody who wants to come and join me up here, you just come right on down. So thanks so much for those questions, guys. Those are great. And so we had a few more, I think, from the Build Up Dietitians team that they were going to go ahead and share, or if anybody else has questions that they want to throw in, we can talk about being in private practice. We can talk about sport nutrition. Actually, maybe while we're kind of getting a couple more questions coming in, here in Canada, we also don't have the same the sport dietitian certification. So Canadian dietitians actually write the American exam, which is really interesting. You can also do other diploma programs, like the International Olympic Committee has a diploma program and things like that, but we don't really have our own sport nutrition governing body or program here in Canada, so we kind of have to piggyback off of other people. But maybe one day we'll be able to get something like that here more locally, which would be great. And so differences between Canadian and US dietetic practice. So some other differences, I'm not sure. I think that a lot of the other stuff that we sort of do as dietitians is very global. A lot of our, the work that we share, the research articles that we go through. I think the only major difference is that we're in metric and you guys are not. Sometimes that makes blood work and having to look back and forth between things a little bit challenging. So do you have to take classes specific to sport dietetic major? So at my university, we don't have a sport dietetic major that you would graduate with. We actually have We do have some sport nutrition classes that you can take, and some people have done sport dietitian or sport dietetic internship placements. We also have like additional courses available through Dietitians of Canada that sport dietitians, aspiring sport dietitians can take, but we don't actually have it as like a designated major. You would just sort of graduate as an RD, and then if you wanted to, after the fact, get some hours and build up your practice and be eligible to write the CSSD exam that you guys have in the States, or people will also do the International Olympic Committee diploma program, or people will sometimes go back and do a master's degree and do a master's degree in sport nutrition. And that's kind of how we get those additional qualifications, but it definitely isn't quite as formal in terms of getting that sport dietitian major. All right, so great questions so far. A lot of things that I didn't know that we were going to be talking about this afternoon, but yeah, I think it's always interesting to kind of look country to country at some of the differences that we have, because everyone does things a little bit differently, and it can be kind of interesting to look across the border and see what people are doing and how it all works. All right, so if anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. And Build Up Dietitians, if there was anything else, I don't think we have too much time left. So Build Up Dietitians, if there was anything else that you guys had on your list that you wanted to kind of go through with our time today, then you can go ahead and put that in the chat box too. We'll just finish up with maybe a couple more questions from you guys. And yeah, while we're waiting, I'll kind of share my social media one last time. So you can find me on Instagram at Steph the Sport Dietitian. There, I'm sort of sharing, information based, sort of consumer based for my clients and for people who follow me about, how to eat like an athlete and some different strategies. Okay, so we have a question here from Build Up Dietitians. The biggest nutrition myth that bugs me. Gosh, to pick only one. I think that the biggest nutrition myth that I'm sort of dealing with, in my private practice with my athletes would definitely be, the food fear that I think a lot of athletes experience, and sort of the under-fueling tendencies of feeling like they shouldn't eat this, they shouldn't eat that. I meet a ton of athletes who are really afraid to eat things that have sugar in them. They might be... I had a cyclist yesterday that I was talking to, and this poor guy is doing 100 kilometers of cycling on the weekends, and he's, doesn't want to have a Gatorade because he's afraid of the sugar. So I think that a lot of the public health messaging that we see in regard to reducing sugar and not eating anything with salt in it and trying to be mindful of calories and carbs, and a lot of that messaging that we kind of see all the time out there, it doesn't apply to athletes, but because our athletes tend to be very health conscious individuals, they're absorbing a lot of that messaging, and they're kind of applying it to themselves when maybe it's not the most appropriate. So they tend to, be feeling like they shouldn't be eating a lot of carbs, they should be avoiding sugars at all costs, they should be very careful with their meal sizes, maybe not eating before and after training, which is just sort of the opposite of the messaging that they should be getting. So I think that, those of us that are working with athletes in sport really have a role to kind of, look into those food fears and try to navigate some of those things, as opposed to just slapping down a nutrition plan that's going to cause someone a lot of anxiety because of all those pre-existing notions that they have. So I would say that's probably number one. Then I have another question here. What hurdles do you see with high school athletes not able to play during COVID, and how do they stay competition ready during quarantine? Yeah, so that's definitely a really, really great question. And, something that I think is we're going to have to wait and see to some extent with some of these programs and some of these schools and what's going to happen. I think there's been two different types of people out there. There's been the ones who maybe still have access to home gym, or you live somewhere where the weather is nice enough that you can still go outside and train, and you can still somewhat keep up with a little bit of normalcy in terms of your routine. Then we have other people who have had, really no access to any meaningful gym equipment and stuff, body weight exercises and everything like that are fabulous, but you know, for high level athletes, they do only get us so far. And so, you know, I think it's going to be a real challenge, especially as things progress. One of the things that I've noticed with some of the people that I've been seeing lately, so just to give you some context, here in Manitoba, we were completely locked down. Everything was closed from about the middle of March to the beginning of May. And then over the summer months, we've just slowly kind of been reopening in various phases. The plan is for everyone to be going back to school in September as per usual. So we'll sort of see how that goes. But what I've been experiencing is I've had, you know, a couple of different athlete experiences where, you know, some of them maybe have all of a sudden stopped and sort of started thinking about their weight and their body size in a way that they never have before. So they've always been very active individuals, and now all of a sudden with stopping all of their sports and taking that step back, they've become a little bit more conscious, which has not been good in terms of their mental health and maybe their body image and their eating behavior. So now sports are starting to increase again. We're starting to get back into training camps and practices, but maybe now they're holding on to some of these food fears and some of these concerns about a couple pounds of weight gain over the past few months. So again, sort of navigating those concerns that an athlete might have and taking that individual approach, I think, is really key, because the experience of what's happened during quarantine is very different from athlete to athlete. So some people maybe are coming out of this and they had a break from playing competitively, they got the rest that they need, and maybe they're feeling great. Other people, this may have been really, really hard for them, and you know, they might feel like they're slower, they might feel like they're heavier, and they might not be in as good of a mental state going forward. So I think being kind, being compassionate, and also making sure that we're taking the time to talk to our athletes about some of these things that they've been going through the past couple of months, just to see if there's any mental health concerns or any body image concerns that we want to make sure we get on top of right away. But yeah, that's a fantastic question. And, you know, I think the next year or so is going to be interesting. It might be very difficult at times. We might see an increase in some of these programs. We might see sports coming back. We might have to go back into shutting them down again. And I think that it's going to be really difficult. So yeah, thank you so much for the question. So I think we're just about wrapping up. We're at the 30-minute mark, but if anybody has a final question that they want to share, then you could just type it into the chat box, and otherwise I'll let Build Up Dietitians either share one more question that they might have. Okay. So I'm still a student and I'm very interested in sport dietetics. What type of facility would you recommend to go to for an internship to gain knowledge and experience in that field? So that's a fantastic question, and I think a little bit of that depends on what sport you maybe want to work with. So we have obviously tons of different sports, tons of different types of athletes, whether it's high school, college, professional, recreational. You know, you might want to get into working with marathon runners or triathletes, or, you know, maybe it's going to be a team sport. The options are endless, which is wonderful. And you know, what I would say is find sport dietitians basketball. Great clarification. So what I would do is I would actually, you know, take to your social media, go on Twitter, look on Facebook, look online, and find sport dietitians who are doing what you want to do, and find people that are already have the career that you kind of aspire to have. You know, and talk to them and find out where did they do their internship placements. You know, are there different places that you can go to kind of take the sport specific path as opposed to doing a more general internship practice? And, you know, just find people that are doing what you love and, you know, kind of piggyback on them and, you know, take up a few minutes of their time if they're able to kind of, you know, get a better sense. I definitely know that I have a lot of students who reach out to me asking questions about private practice, how to get into it, you know, what should they look for, what are kind of those first steps. And, you know, as somebody who enjoys talking to students and helping students along, you know, to kind of get everyone into the career that they love, then it's usually something that isn't too much trouble. So thank you so much for the question, and I think that's going to wrap us up for now. So thank you so much, everybody who came on. This was a lot of fun. It was great chatting with you guys, and like I said, you can find me on my social media. I shared all my channels a little bit earlier, and you'll be able to find them again from this video. See you guys later. Thanks, everybody.